Every year, on the night of Halloween, the Thompson family's farmhouse stands silent, too silent. They know better than to leave lights on or doors unlocked. Because at the stroke of midnight, the spirit comes, not just any ghost, but one that only appears once a year, lingering just long enough to claim a memory, a secret, or a fear no one else can see. The youngest child swears she sees a shadow moving behind the trees. The father feels icy fingers brush against his arm when no one is near. And the matriarch? She has nightmares that bleed into reality, nightmares of a face she can't forget. This year, something feels different. The air is heavier, darker. The pumpkin lanterns flicker even when there's no wind. And from the corner of the attic, a whisper calls out, "Will the Thompsons survive the night? Or will this Halloween bring a secret they can never undo?" Click to uncover the spirit that returns once a year and never leaves unchanged. The Thompson farmhouse had stood at the edge of Hollow Creek for over a century, its weathered wood and sagging roof blending almost seamlessly into the surrounding woods. Every autumn, as the leaves turned amber and gold, the locals whispered about the house, but no one dared to stay for Halloween. Not anymore. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood polish and damp earth. The matriarch, Eleanor Thompson, walked through the hallways with careful steps, her eyes tracing the familiar cracks in the walls. She knew every creak, every draft, and every shadow, but even she could feel that something was different this year. The air was heavier, laden with a tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck rise. The children, Lila and Nathan, were restless. They scurried through the rooms, dragging fallen leaves in on their shoes, giggling and squealing, oblivious to the unspoken warnings. Lila, the youngest, had begun to whisper about shadows in the corners of the attic, shapes that seemed to stretch and move when no one was looking. Nathan, braver in appearance but equally unnerved, had taken to placing small charms around the house, convinced they would ward off something unseen. Eleanor's husband, Richard, paced the living room, glancing at the clock every few minutes. He had spent years rationalizing the family's experiences, drafts, creaky floors, overactive imaginations, but even he could not ignore the weight pressing down on the farmhouse that evening. He felt it in the vibration of the floorboards, in the unnatural chill that seeped through the walls, and in the flickering of the lanterns that should have been steady. Outside, the wind had begun to pick up. The skeletal branches of the surrounding trees scratched against the windows like fingers desperate to enter. Hollow Creek itself seemed to hold its breath, the waters still and black beneath the waxing moon. The air was filled with a subtle hum, almost imperceptible, like the low vibration of something immense lurking just beyond perception. As evening fell, the Thompsons gathered in the living room. Eleanor tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, lighting candles on the mantel and arranging freshly carved pumpkins along the sill. But the flames danced violently, reacting not to the draft but to something unseen. Shadows flickered across the walls, not cast by the firelight, but by an invisible presence, moving with a purpose that made Eleanor's chest tighten. Lila tugged at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "It's coming tonight, isn't it?" Eleanor forced a smile, shaking her head, but she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. She remembered the stories, passed down through generations, the warnings etched into every word of the family history. The spirit came every Halloween, never earlier, never later. Its visits were fleeting, but the memories it took, the truths it revealed, lingered long after it disappeared. Richard attempted to laugh, joking about Halloween pranks, but the sound felt hollow even to him. His eyes kept drifting to the attic door, half expecting it to swing open on its own. A faint scratching had begun from above, intermittent and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was testing the threshold between the living and the unseen. The children were growing more restless. Nathan placed a circle of salt on the floor, insisting it would keep the spirit at bay. Lila hid under the table, her small hands gripping the wooden edge as her wide eyes scanned the shadows that seemed to gather in unnatural clusters. Eleanor's heart pounded, and she realized that the family's attempts to rationalize or protect themselves were futile. Whatever came tonight would not be deterred by charm, by light, or by reason. Outside, the wind carried a new sound, a faint, sorrowful wail rising from the direction of the creek. It was almost human, yet distorted, echoing through the trees in a way that made every instinct in Eleanor scream for her to run. But she stayed, paralyzed by the combination of fear and duty. The Thompson legacy, the history of their home, and the spirit that haunted it were intertwined in ways she could not escape. The first candle on the mantel sputtered and went out. Then the second. The room was bathed in an unnatural dimness, the kind that seems to exist between shadow and substance. Eleanor could feel the presence before she saw it, a cold, deliberate gaze sweeping across the room, settling briefly on each family member. It was Nathan who noticed it first, a shape at the edge of the living room, barely perceptible. He pointed, stammering, but by the time Eleanor and Richard turned, there was nothing. Just the thickening shadows and the faint hum of the house settling. Or perhaps something else, something alive beneath its floorboards. As the clock struck midnight, the house itself seemed to pause. Every creak ceased, every draft stilled. The world outside fell silent, and then a single whisper, soft, deliberate, and impossibly close, traveled along the walls. Eleanor froze, recognizing the cadence. The tone. It was the voice of the spirit, the one that only visited on Halloween. And this year, Eleanor knew instinctively it would not leave the same way it always had. Will the Thompson family survive the night, or will the spirit reveal a secret that changes them forever? Click to witness the terror unfold. The first few hours after midnight passed in a tense, almost unbearable silence. The Thompsons huddled together in the living room, the children's wide eyes reflecting every flicker of candlelight, every shifting shadow. The house had grown colder, not the kind of cold that comes from a draft or the autumn wind, but a penetrating chill that seemed to seep into bones, chilling thoughts as well as bodies. Eleanor could feel it in her chest. A slow, insistent pressure, like someone pressing against her heart. The family had tried to prepare for this night, but preparation was meaningless when the rules belonged to something else entirely. The spirit was patient, calculated, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. It began subtly. The sound of footsteps upstairs. Not light, careful steps of a human, but deliberate, heavy, measured. Richard whispered that it must be the wind, or perhaps the settling of old wood. But the thuds continued, moving methodically from room to room, tracing patterns that made Eleanor's stomach knot with fear. Lila, huddled beneath a blanket, began to whimper. She claimed she could see a figure outside the window, a form as pale as moonlight with eyes that glimmered faintly blue. Nathan tried to be brave, repeating over and over that it was imagination. But even he couldn't ignore the unnatural pulse of the air around them. The way shadows stretched and flickered, with an intelligence he couldn't understand. Then the house groaned, loudly, as though it were a living thing. Floorboards buckled beneath unseen weight. The chandelier swayed violently despite there being no wind, sending splinters of light across the walls. The candles flickered as if blown by 1,000 tiny mouths. Eleanor clutched the edge of the mantel, her knuckles white, her breath shallow. A soft whisper filled the room. Not one voice, but many layered together, repeating words in a cadence that both drew in and repelled. "Remember, remember, remember," the family froze. Richard turned to call out to the children, but his voice caught in his throat. The whispering seemed to rise from the very floorboards beneath their feet. They could feel it vibrating through their bones. Lila whimpered again. "It's here," she said, her small voice trembling. "It wants something from us." Eleanor's heart tightened. She remembered the stories, tales her grandmother had told of the spirit that only visited on Halloween, taking memories, truths, or secrets from those who dwelled too long in fear or denial. The legend was always told in hushed tones, a warning to children and adults alike. Now, the warning was real. The first contact came from the attic. A soft scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across wood, drew every eye upward. The children clutched one another, and Richard moved toward the stairs, forcing his trembling legs to climb. Eleanor followed, holding the candle as a feeble shield against the dark. The attic door creaked open slowly, seemingly on its own. Dust swirled in the candlelight, revealing the outlines of old furniture and boxes untouched for years. And then a shadow moved across the wall. It wasn't the shape of a person exactly. It was taller, thinner, its head tilting in impossible angles. The air grew colder still, frosting the edges of the candlelight. The family recoiled as the shadow elongated, stretching toward them with deliberate intent. The whispering became clearer. Words that only Eleanor could understand, phrases that gnawed at the corners of memory. Your secrets, your silence, your fear. Richard stumbled backward, knocking over a small chest. Inside, old photographs spilled across the floor. Lila picked one up, a faded image of a young girl standing in the farmhouse yard, smiling, yet her eyes were hollow and dark. The figure in the photo bore a chilling resemblance to the shadow moving above them. The spirit had chosen its form. It was a reflection of memory, of what the family feared most. And now it was here. As the hours wore on, the spirit manifested more boldly. Objects moved without touch. Pictures on the walls tilted. Mirrors reflected shapes that weren't there. Every room seemed to warp, ceilings elongating, floors sagging, walls breathing subtly like living things. The children whispered of faces in the shadows, faces pleading, accusing, or silently screaming. The most unnerving presence was Eli, or rather the way the spirit focused on him. Whenever he wandered a few feet from the group, shadows seemed to follow. His drawings, placed in neat stacks on the table, shifted on their own to depict scenes of the spirit rising from the earth, its arms reaching toward the family. Eleanor tried to steady herself, repeating prayers she hadn't said since childhood. Yet the words did nothing. The house was no longer hers, the night no longer a simple measure of time. It belonged to the spirit. The crescendo of terror came in waves. The wind outside screamed, rattling the window panes. The fireplace, untouched, flared violently before extinguishing entirely. Then the whispering changed, no longer subtle, no longer polite. Bring it. Remember, or lose it. The family didn't understand. They had no idea what it was, but instinct told them this was the spirit's demand. And instinct told them that denial or hiding would only make it stronger. Eleanor's gaze returned to the attic. The shadow paused, its head tilting as if listening, as if judging. The whispering intensified, layering the voices of the past and present into a tapestry of fear. Every memory, every secret, every lie in the Thompson family was now palpable, vibrating in the air like invisible threads. The children screamed as books and objects began to levitate around them. Papers tore from old boxes, swirling through the air like autumn leaves caught in a violent wind. Richard tried to grab Nathan, only to be met with icy resistance, as if the house itself were holding them in place. The spirit advanced slowly, methodically. It did not rush, for it had all the time in the world. The shadows in the corners stretched, bending toward the center of the room where the family huddled. The candle flames bent unnaturally, flickering toward the shape as if drawn by an unseen magnet. And then, at the stroke of 2 a.m., the house fell silent. The whispering stopped. The wind outside ceased. Even the children's rapid breathing seemed to pause. And then the attic door creaked open fully, revealing the shadow in its entirety, a tall, ethereal figure with elongated limbs and hollow, glowing eyes. Its presence was suffocating, yet oddly precise, like it knew exactly where every member of the family's fears resided. Eleanor understood instantly. The spirit wasn't just here to scare them. It was here to claim something, to extract the memories, truths, or secrets the Thompsons had buried, intentional or not. And the family was powerless. The night stretched on, the house now a stage for the supernatural drama, each second pulling the family further into the spirit's domain. Every creak, every flicker, every whisper reminded them that Halloween was no longer just a holiday. It was a reckoning. By the end of the night, the Thompsons were exhausted, physically and mentally drained, but the spirit was not finished. Its presence lingered, patient, waiting for the moment to escalate again. The final confrontation that would define whether the family survived or became part of the spirit's collection forever. The clock ticks, the shadows stretch, and the spirit waits for the secret that will break the Thompsons forever. Watch what happens when Halloween becomes a night that won't end. The clock struck 3. The house seemed to breathe in unison with the Thompsons' panicked hearts, each thud of the second hand a hammer against their chests. The shadows had grown thick, dense, curling like smoke into corners, pooling under furniture, wrapping the family in a suffocating darkness that neither candlelight nor courage could pierce. Eleanor clutched her children to her chest, trying to anchor them to the world she had always known. But the house itself had transformed. The walls seemed to bend inward, the ceilings stretched impossibly high, the floors rippled like water. Every familiar surface had become alien. Every room was a trap, every doorway a threshold to fear. From the attic, a low hum began, vibrating through the floorboards, resonating in their bones. Then the whispers returned, but this time they were sharp, urgent, almost demanding. "Bring it, reveal. Or be taken." Leela trembled, pointing toward the shadow that had now fully manifested in the center of the living room. It hovered above the floor, head tilting unnaturally, eyes glowing blue-white, limbs bending in impossible angles. Its gaze swept the room like a predator inspecting prey, and the Thompsons could feel it weighing their every secret, every hidden thought. Richard tried to speak, to assert control, but the words caught in his throat. Every time he opened his mouth, the shadow pulsed, and a wave of icy pressure knocked him backward. Eleanor realized instinctively the spirit was feeding off their fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat, every tremor, every whispered panic. The first assault came silently. Objects lifted from shelves and tables, spinning in midair like satellites in a violent orbit. Photographs tore themselves from frames, books flew open, pages tearing, spinning, raining down like confetti soaked in ink. The children screamed, covering their heads, yet the figure did not flinch. It did not need to. The chaos was the message. The Thompsons were powerless. Then the voice spoke directly, in a tone that resonated inside the skull, rather than the ears. "Your secrets, your lies, your fear. Give them to me." Eleanor's mind raced. She understood now that the spirit demanded something. Not objects, not offerings, but truth. Memories long buried, moments of guilt, shame, and unspoken fears were being drawn to the surface, and the figure wanted them released into its grasp. Richard lunged, trying to protect the children, to reach the figure, but invisible hands gripped him, holding him in place. Lila shrieked as a chair lifted behind her and hovered menacingly. Nathan, clutching his charms, cried out, but the symbols offered no protection. The spirit bent the room itself into its will. Time stretched, distorted. Each second felt like minutes. The whispering intensified, layered with the voices of past victims, memories collected over decades of Halloween nights. Every wall, every floorboard vibrated with their presence. Eleanor, summoning the last of her courage, stepped forward. She realized that the spirit wasn't interested in harming them physically. It wanted something far more profound: confession, acknowledgement, recognition of truths they had hidden even from themselves. She closed her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath, and spoke. Not aloud, but in the place between thought and intention. She laid bare her fears, her regrets, the secrets of the family that had festered quietly for generations. The spirit reacted instantly. The shadows pulsed. The lights flickered violently, and the air seemed to hum with tension. One by one, the family followed Eleanor. Richard admitted his failures, Nathan and Lila their secret fears and imaginings. The room quaked with the release of hidden truths. The spirit absorbed them, its form shimmering with an otherworldly glow, twisting and pulsing with the weight of every memory offered. And then, something unexpected happened. The shadow froze, its head tilted considering. For the first time, it seemed uncertain. The Thompsons held their collective breath, feeling the moment stretch beyond comprehension. The spirit reached forward with a limb that bent unnaturally, hovering over the center of the room. It drew in the memories, drawing them closer to its core, and then it did something the family hadn't anticipated. It released a sound. A low, mournful wail that resonated through the walls, shaking the furniture, shaking the bones of the house. The air grew still, almost peaceful, yet charged. The shadows retreated slightly, curling back into the corners. lingering only as whispers in the peripheral vision. The figure hovered for a heartbeat more, its glowing eyes sweeping across the faces of the family, and then it vanished. The house fell silent. Candle flames steadied. The chill lifted. Yet the Thompsons knew instinctively that the spirit's visit had not truly ended. It had taken what it came for, but it had left a lingering mark, a subtle, imperceptible tether between itself and the family that would bind them for years to come. Eleanor sank to the floor, trembling. The children clung to her, exhausted and pale, eyes wide from the terror they had endured. Richard held them all together, unsteady, yet relieved to be alive. The house, though still and quiet, felt different. Alive, yet watching. Morning came softly over Hollow Creek. The first pale light filtered through the windows of the Thompson farmhouse, illuminating dust motes that floated lazily in the air. On the surface, everything seemed calm. The wind had died, the creaking floorboards no longer whispered, and the candle flames flickered gently in the early light. But the calm was deceptive. Eleanor, standing in the living room, could still feel it, the lingering presence, the subtle pull of something unseen, watching, waiting. She brushed a hand over the mantel, over the photos of family past, and felt a chill run up her arm. The house had survived the night, but the spirit's visit had left a mark, invisible yet palpable. The children were quiet. Lila clutched Nathan's hand tightly, her wide eyes scanning every corner of the room. Even the animals in the house, cats and birds, moved cautiously, as if sensing the residual energy that hung thick in the air. Eleanor knew instinctively that the spirit had taken more than just memories. It had embedded itself in the house, in the family, in the very air they breathed. Richard moved to check the windows. Looking out at the yard, the pumpkin lanterns had melted unevenly, their wax twisted as if shaped by invisible fingers. The garden gate swung slightly, though there had been no wind. Small traces of disturbed soil lined the path to the woods, hinting at the unseen presence that had moved freely during the night. Eleanor gathered the children. "It's over. For now," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Her grandmother's old warnings echoed in her mind. The spirit comes every Halloween. It always returns. Its visits are brief, but the impact lasts far longer than anyone can predict. The family tried to continue their routine, but something had shifted. Every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the gust of wind, even the tick of the clock, reminded them that the night had changed them. Nathan found himself hesitating before stepping into shadowed corners. Lila refused to go near the attic. Even Eleanor and Richard noticed subtle disturbances, misplaced objects, whispers in quiet moments, the sensation of being watched when no one was there. Over the following days, the family attempted to rationalize the experience. They spoke in hushed tones, avoiding certain topics, pretending it was imagination or fatigue. But the spirit's touch was undeniable. Eleanor noticed small changes in herself, dreams that revealed things she had buried long ago, memories she had not recalled for decades. Richard experienced vivid, unsettling visions that left him drained. The children, innocent though they were, seemed to sense the lingering presence in ways words could not capture. The attic became a forbidden space. Even when the sun shone, the shadows seemed heavier there, the air denser. Lila occasionally whispered to herself, tracing imaginary patterns in the dust as if communicating with someone unseen. Nathan left small charms and drawings, offering them silently to the air, unsure whether they were meant for protection or appeasement. Outside, Hollow Creek flowed as usual, yet something about it had changed. The water's surface seemed darker, reflective in a way that felt unnatural. The woods surrounding the farmhouse were still, eerily so, as if holding their breath. Eleanor sometimes thought she saw movement among the trees, figures too fleeting to identify, yet unmistakably present. The family's nights remained restless. Sleep was interrupted by dreams that were too vivid to dismiss. A tall, glowing figure moving through the house, shadows bending and twisting, whispers layering over memories, unearthing fears long concealed. Even waking moments were tinged with unease. Every creak, every flicker of light, was a reminder that the spirit's visit had left a permanent echo. Despite the terror, there was a subtle lesson embedded in the experience. The spirit demanded acknowledgement. By confronting the truths it had surfaced, the hidden fears, the unspoken regrets, the family's secrets, the Thompsons began to confront each other with honesty. Arguments that had lingered for years dissolved in the face of shared trauma. Eleanor realized that the spirit, in its terrifying way, had forced the family to confront the things they had avoided, the truths they had hidden from each other and themselves. And yet the relief was fragile. Eleanor understood, as her grandmother had warned, that this peace was temporary. The spirit's cycle was relentless. Halloween would return, as it always did, and with it, the opportunity, or the threat, to reveal more, to test the family's fortitude once again. By the first week of November, the house felt quieter, but not empty. The Thompsons moved cautiously through each room, aware of the subtle disturbances that had become part of daily life. Shadows shifted unnaturally, objects occasionally moved, and sometimes, in the still of night, a faint hum resonated through the floorboards. Eleanor often paused in these moments, feeling the weight of something watching, and realized the truth she had always known. The spirit had left more than memories behind. It had left a tether, invisible yet potent, binding the family to it in a way that could not be undone. Despite the lingering fear, there was a strange sense of clarity. Secrets had been confronted. Fears had been faced, if only partially. The Thompsons knew that while the spirit would always return, their courage, their honesty, and their connection as a family were now their tools of survival. The final lesson was stark and unyielding. Some forces are patient, some memories eternal, and some spirits, though fleeting in presence, leave permanent marks. The house, the family, and the land itself had been changed. Nothing would ever be the same. And on every Halloween thereafter, when the wind carried the faintest whispers through Hollow Creek, Eleanor, Richard, and the children would remember. They would remember the night when the spirit came, demanding truth, unearthing secrets, and leaving behind an unshakable imprint. They would remember the lessons learned in terror, the fragile strength discovered in fear, and the knowledge that the spirit's return was inevitable. Even as they attempted to return to normal life, the unseen presence lingered, a shadow at the edge of sight, a whisper in the corner of consciousness, a breath in the stillness. It reminded them that Halloween was no longer just a night of costumes and candy. It was a night of reckoning, of memories confronted, and of forces that could never be fully ignored. The spirit will return next Halloween, waiting patiently, unseen yet unforgettable. Are you brave enough to uncover what it demands?